It was a Tuesday morning when I stumbled across it, completely by accident. I had opened my phone to check the weather and ended up scrolling through my social media feed, the usual mix of cat videos, recipe suggestions, and the occasional news headline. And there it was, a wedding album, tagged with my daughter Emma's name. My heart stopped for a moment, and then a strange numbness settled over me. She looked radiant, yes, the happiest I had ever seen her, standing beside a man I didn't recognize, in a church I had never visited, wearing a gown that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe combined. The caption said, "Emma and Jason, September 21st, 2024, followed by a string of emojis and congratulations from people I didn't know. I scrolled slowly, each photo a dagger. Friends I had never met, family I hadn't seen in years. Smiling for cameras I wasn't allowed to hold. No one had bothered to tell me. Not a phone call, not a text, not even a hint. My daughter had gotten married, and I was the last person in the world to know. I felt the room tilt slightly, like the floor had disappeared beneath me. My coffee cup sat untouched on the kitchen counter, my morning routine forgotten. I stared at the screen, hoping somehow it was a mistake, a delayed post, a cruel joke, but it wasn't. Emma had planned this day, invited every important person in her life, and had deliberately left me out. That thought hit harder than I expected. I had spent 25 years raising her, nurturing her, sacrificing my own comfort and desires so she could have opportunities I never had. I had celebrated her birthdays, watched every school play, and cheered at every sports game. I had been there for scraped knees, broken hearts, late-night panic attacks, and college acceptance letters. And yet, when it came to the most important moment of her adult life, the one where she would publicly choose a partner, the one where memories are etched in photographs and hearts, I didn't exist. Not even in the background, not even quietly present in a pew, not even a fleeting thought expressed in a phone call. Nothing. I felt my hands shake. I wanted to call her, to scream, to demand an explanation, but even as I reached for the phone, my mind slowed me down. This wasn't about anger right now, not yet. Right now, it was about comprehension, about acknowledging a reality I had been blind to for years. I was no longer central to her life. I had been sidelined, pushed into a role I never agreed to play, and had spent decades pretending it was acceptable. The living room felt smaller, the walls closing in with the weight of silence. I sat down, pulled the laptop from the counter, and opened the album in full screen mode. Each photo I clicked through seemed to taunt me. Emma laughing with her new husband, cutting the cake, throwing petals into the air, the bouquet toss, the first dance, the close-up of her ring. It was all there, all without me. I swallowed hard, trying to contain the swirl of emotions, betrayal, sadness, disbelief, but beneath it all, a seed of realization had begun to sprout. If Emma could live a day of her life without considering my presence, perhaps I could start living mine the same way. The idea didn't come fully formed. It arrived as a quiet whisper in the back of my mind while I sat staring at those wedding photos. I realized that for years I had constructed my life around being available for Emma, waiting for her calls, shaping my own happiness around hers, always anticipating the needs of someone who, in the end, didn't seem to notice mine. That night, after the images had blurred into a haze and my phone lay lifeless on the kitchen counter, I went into my bedroom and opened the closet where I kept her things. Childhood drawings, awards, the old prom dress I had preserved, photographs from birthdays, vacations, and holidays, all neatly organized, all reminders of a life spent for someone else. I touched the frames lightly, feeling the years press down on me. And then, for the first time in decades, I felt a clarity so sharp it was almost painful. If Emma could exclude me from her wedding, I could exclude her from the parts of my life I wanted to protect. If Hope, my own daughter, could proceed without my presence in the most meaningful moments, then perhaps I could finally stop living in anticipation of her approval. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want confrontation. I wanted something more profound, autonomy. That night, I opened the filing cabinet where I kept all the documents I had accumulated over the years: bank statements, investment accounts, insurance papers, and property deeds. I had always been meticulous, careful, preparing for emergencies, planning for retirement, saving for the future, but all with a mindset that these resources were meant to support her, to be ready when she might need me. Now, as I thumbed through the neatly stacked folders, I understood that this wealth was mine, not a tool to secure my daughter's approval or gratitude. A thought crossed my mind, daring and unexpected. I could sell her house. The townhouse I had co-signed, that I had helped renovate, that I had subsidized when she couldn't make the payments on her own, was entirely in my name. I hadn't needed to, but I had insisted because I wanted security, for both of us. But now, in the wake of her wedding and exclusion, that security became my leverage, my instrument of freedom. I would turn the symbol of my sacrifices, the house that had represented years of dedication, into a stepping stone for my independence. I didn't act impulsively. I planned. I would wait a few days, let the shock settle, and then make arrangements with my real estate agent. I would use the proceeds not to spite Emma, but to create a life entirely separate from hers. A life where I was the protagonist, not a background figure in someone else's story. In that silence, late at night, I began to write. Not a letter, not a confrontation, but a blueprint for the life I wanted. I wrote down my goals: financial independence, a home of my own, new routines, new experiences, and boundaries that would protect me from further emotional disregard. The words came easily, because for once, they were about me. I realized that I had been waiting for permission, for validation, for acknowledgement that never arrived, and now I could give it to myself. The following morning, I made my first practical move. I called the real estate agent who had helped me with other properties over the years and arranged a meeting to discuss listing the townhouse. The agent, Mr. Collins, was polite but surprised. "Is everything okay, Mrs. Reynolds?" he asked, his voice careful. "Yes, everything is fine," I replied, deliberately calm. "I've decided it's time for a change, and this house will be part of that." He asked no further questions, but I could sense the curiosity. I didn't offer explanations. There was no need. My plan was not for anyone's approval. By the time I hung up, I felt a sense of momentum I hadn't felt in years. The air seemed lighter, the sunlight brighter. For the first time in decades, I realized that living for myself could be just as fulfilling, just as urgent, just as necessary as living for someone else. My life was no longer a series of waiting rooms, a collection of deferred dreams. It was a blank canvas, and I held the brush. That day, I didn't tell anyone, not Emma, not friends, not family. I didn't have to. The decisions were mine, and their impact would be mine to bear alone, with pride, not resentment. By the evening, I had drafted a more detailed plan: assess all my financial resources, sell the townhouse, secure a personal residence, create new routines, explore hobbies I had abandoned for years, and slowly, carefully set boundaries with Emma. I knew she would call, perhaps even plead, perhaps even argue, but the vision I had for my life required me to stand firm. I needed to be clear that exclusion had consequences, not as punishment, but as a lesson in self-respect. That night, I went to bed feeling a mixture of sadness and anticipation, the first strange taste of liberation. It was the beginning of a transformation, a shift from years of living in the background of my daughter's life to becoming the central figure in my own. And in that quiet, contemplative darkness, I knew I was ready for the first step. Tomorrow, I would take it. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, as if my body understood the gravity of what was about to begin. I brewed my coffee, strong and black, and sat at the small kitchen table where I had spent so many mornings planning Emma's future, arranging schedules, worrying over homework, and organizing her friends' visits. Today, that same table felt different. It wasn't a command center for someone else's life. It was my headquarters, the place where I would plan my own. I opened my notebook, the same one I had used for years to track Emma's school events, doctor appointments, and social milestones. The pages were yellowed, the handwriting a mixture of my neat script and hurried notes, but today they would serve a new purpose. I wrote at the top, "Plan for Independence, September 25th, 2024. The date felt right, though my hand shook slightly with anticipation. Step 1. Assess resources. I went through my financial documents carefully, double-checking every account, every investment, every savings bond. I had more than I realized. The townhouse Emma had purchased with my help was fully in my name. The savings I had tucked away from years of sewing, tutoring, and extra work provided a solid cushion. The retirement funds I had carefully contributed to were stable, and I had insurance policies that could easily cover unforeseen expenses. I realized I had enough to live comfortably for many years without needing anyone else's assistance, including Emma. The realization was strangely empowering. Step 2, list the townhouse. I called Mr. Getz Collins again and told him I was ready to move forward. "Excellent, Mrs. Reynolds," he said, almost cheerfully. "I'll have a photographer out tomorrow and we can list it by Friday." I thanked him, keeping my voice calm, controlled. I didn't need to explain why. I didn't owe anyone an explanation, least of all Emma. After the call, I walked through the townhouse room by room, not as a mother checking on her child's belongings, but as an owner evaluating an asset. I noted the condition of the floors, the brightness of the living room, the way the sun hit the balcony in the morning. Every detail mattered. I could hear the echoes of years spent fixing this house, arranging furniture, repainting walls, and yet today it didn't feel like memories to mourn. It felt like steps in a transaction toward freedom. I decided to remove personal items that had belonged to Emma over the years. Her school papers, art projects, childhood mementos, they were neatly boxed and labeled, ready to be stored temporarily in my garage until I decided their final destination. I didn't feel sadness, only a strange detachment, as if these objects belonged to a life that was no longer mine to manage emotionally. By the afternoon, I had begun researching apartments for myself. I wanted something manageable, cozy, and entirely my own, a place where I would not feel like a guest, where no one would question my routines or decisions. I contacted a real estate agent who specialized in one-bedroom apartments and senior-friendly communities. After a short conversation, she suggested a few options within a reasonable distance from my favorite coffee shop, the grocery store I frequented, and the park where I liked to walk. I scheduled viewings for the following week, the earliest opportunity to start building a life that revolved around my own needs, not Emma's. That evening, I made another call, this one to a lawyer I had consulted years ago for a property matter. Mr. Grant, a steady, calm man in his late 50s, picked up promptly. "Mrs. Reynolds, how are you?" he asked. "Good," I said, choosing my words carefully. "I need to update my will and make sure my assets are organized. I've made some decisions recently and want everything in order." He didn't probe, didn't question. He simply scheduled an appointment for the following Tuesday, giving me space to prepare my documents. I hung up and sat for a long moment, the weight of what I was doing settling into my chest. For decades, I had been reactive, living life around Emma's needs, always anticipating, always giving, rarely asserting myself. Now, I was proactive. I was taking control, and it felt strange, exhilarating, and terrifying all at once. That night, I didn't watch television or scroll through social media. Instead, I revisited old hobbies I had neglected for years, sketching, knitting, and writing short reflections in my journal. I realized how long it had been since I did anything purely for myself without considering its usefulness for Emma or for anyone else. Each stitch, each sketch, each word felt like a reclaiming of lost time, a tangible assertion that my life was mine to shape. The next morning, I walked to the bank, a place I had frequented often enough but never truly felt in control of. Mr. Hernandez, my account manager, greeted me warmly. "Good morning, Mrs. Reynolds. How can I help you today?" I smiled and handed him a list of transactions I wanted to execute, including transferring funds to ensure liquidity for my upcoming move and investment in a new personal residence. As he worked, I felt a curious sensation. Respect. Not the polite, automatic respect given to long-term clients, but genuine recognition that I was fully capable of making important financial decisions. That recognition bolstered my resolve. I walked out of the bank feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. No one had treated me as a competent decision-maker for years, and now, step by step, I was claiming that role for myself. Over the next few days, I began organizing the townhouse for sale. I arranged for minor repairs, cleaned every corner, and donated items I no longer needed to charity. I felt a surprising sense of joy in these tasks. They weren't chores, they were rituals of transformation. I realized that I was not just preparing the house for new owners. I was preparing myself for a new phase of life. I was shedding obligations that had long weighed me down, obligations that had bound me to Emma's life without reciprocity. By the end of the week, the house was ready. Mr. Collins arrived to take photographs, capturing the sunny living room, the neat kitchen, and the balcony where I had often stood, watching Emma play in the backyard. As he worked, I felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and liberation. These were memories, yes, but they no longer demanded my emotional captivity. They were mine to honor on my terms, not to suffer through silently. That evening, I sat on my porch, coffee in hand, and allowed myself to imagine a life beyond the expectations of being just Emma's mother. I pictured mornings spent reading in my new apartment, afternoons at community events, evenings cooking meals for myself without worrying if anyone else would eat them. I imagined friendships that were chosen, not inherited, and hobbies pursued purely for my own joy. That vision gave me a thrill I hadn't experienced in decades, and as I scrolled past Emma's wedding album once more, I felt a shift. I didn't feel anger anymore, at least not in the raw, suffocating sense that had gripped me the first day. I felt clarity, the clear understanding that my absence from her wedding did not diminish my worth or the love I had given her. It merely signaled a turning point. She had chosen a path that excluded me, and I had chosen a path that prioritized my dignity, my happiness, and my life. That night, I wrote in my notebook again. Tomorrow, begin apartment viewings. Begin living for Clara Reynolds. I closed the notebook with a sense of finality. The old life, defined by waiting, sacrificing, and hoping for inclusion, was ending. A new life, defined by autonomy, joy, and self-respect, was beginning. I went to bed with a calm determination I had never known, ready to face the first tangible steps of my independence. The next morning, I woke early again, not because of anxiety, but because excitement now pulled me out of bed. I dressed carefully in a comfortable blouse and trousers, practical yet presentable, something that would make me feel at home in any apartment I visited. I packed my notebook and a small folder containing financial documents, just in case a conversation required clarification. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of fall leaves, and as I stepped out of my front door, I felt as if I were stepping into a new chapter, literally leaving one life behind and moving toward another. My first viewing was at a small, quiet apartment complex downtown. The lobby smelled faintly of fresh paint and polished wood, and a receptionist greeted me warmly. "Mrs. Reynolds, welcome. The manager will take you on a tour," she said, handing me a visitor badge. I followed her through wide corridors, past neatly trimmed shrubs, to an apartment on the second floor. The apartment was modest but bright, with a living area that opened into a small kitchen, a bedroom with enough space for a reading nook, and a balcony overlooking a quiet courtyard. I stepped onto the balcony and let the sun hit my face, imagining myself drinking morning coffee there, watching the neighborhood wake up. It was peaceful. It was mine. I made mental notes of the closet space, the bathroom storage, and the natural light in the kitchen. Each small detail mattered because it would be part of a life entirely chosen by me, for me, not tailored to anyone else's needs. The manager, a pleasant woman named Claire, explained the amenities: a small fitness room, community lounge, weekly social events, and a garden courtyard where residents could sit, read, or chat. The words seemed like a promise, a place where I could meet new friends without obligation, without expectation. I smiled, a genuine smile that felt lighter than any I had felt in years. After that, I visited 2 more apartments that afternoon. One was slightly larger but lacked a balcony. The other was cozy but on a lower floor with little natural light. Both were fine, but my heart kept returning to the first apartment. The balcony, the sun, the quiet. The feeling of privacy and autonomy was undeniable. I left the viewings with a sense of certainty that surprised even me. The first apartment would be my new home. On the way back, I stopped at my favorite cafe and ordered my usual black coffee. I sat by the window and watched people walk past, some heading to work, others walking dogs, children skipping along the sidewalk. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about Emma or anyone else. I was simply observing life as a participant, not a caretaker. I pulled out my notebook and began drafting a moving timeline. I listed what furniture I would take, what I would sell or donate, and the dates I would contact moving companies. The act of organizing felt empowering. Each task completed was a step away from the old life of waiting for approval, of sacrificing for someone who didn't recognize my worth. That afternoon, I made another crucial decision: the townhouse. I called Mr. Collins to confirm that the listing would go live on Friday, and I instructed him to include all details highlighting the property's best features. "I'll handle the inquiries," he said. "You don't need to do anything but sign off when it's sold." I thanked him calmly. I didn't need to explain why I was selling. No one had asked, and no one would. This was a life choice, not a negotiation. That evening, I sat at my desk and opened the file where I had stored Emma's belongings. The boxes of keepsakes I had moved out of the townhouse. Each object stirred a memory, some bittersweet, some neutral, but I realized something important. These were not chains. They were evidence of love given freely for decades. They didn't dictate my present or future. I carefully packed them for storage in the garage, labeling each box with neutral tags: schoolwork, art, books. I didn't want to hide them, but I also didn't want them cluttering the life I was about to claim. The process was cathartic. I wasn't discarding memories, I was asserting boundaries. That night, I called Mr. Grant to confirm my appointment with the lawyer the following Tuesday. The conversation was brief, practical, and polite. He reminded me to bring identification and financial documentation, which I had already prepared. As I hung up, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. Legal clarity would mean peace of mind, a recognition that I could control not only my present, but also my legacy. Tuesday arrived quickly, and I drove to Mr. Grant's office with a calm anticipation. We spent hours reviewing my assets, accounts, and property. I asked questions I had never dared to ask before about the distribution of my estate, trusts, and provisions. Mr. Grant listened patiently and advised thoughtfully. I decided that half of my estate would be allocated to charitable causes, organizations that supported independent women, and the other half to Emma, but with a condition. Emma would only access her inheritance if she wrote a reflective letter, explaining the choices she had made that affected our relationship. It wasn't a punitive measure. It was a method to foster awareness and responsibility. Mr. Grant nodded appreciatively. "It's thoughtful, Mrs. Reynolds," he said. "It allows her to reflect without forcing a reconciliation." "Exactly," I replied. That afternoon, I visited a moving company to schedule my relocation. The representative was courteous, providing a detailed estimate and timeline. I decided to move most of my belongings over a weekend, keeping only essential items until the townhouse was sold. The idea of moving into a smaller, manageable apartment felt liberating. I would own every square foot, every decision, every object, entirely on my own terms. Over the next few days, I sorted, donated, and packed with deliberate precision. Each item removed was a symbolic act of reclaiming space in my life. I labeled boxes meticulously, separating sentimental items from practical necessities. When it came to Emma's belongings, I boxed them with care, storing them in the garage, untouched by sentimentality, ready for her to retrieve if she wished. By Friday, the townhouse was photographed, cleaned, and officially listed. I watched the online listing go live and felt no pangs of regret. This wasn't a loss, it was a release. A new chapter awaited me, and the old one was finally complete. Saturday morning, I began moving boxes to my new apartment. The movers were efficient, courteous, and professional. I supervised without intrusion, aware that this was my moment, my decision, my life. As the truck left, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, coffee in hand, sunlight spilling across the floor. For the first time in decades, I felt unburdened. I felt autonomy. I felt peace. And I understood something vital. Emma's choices were her own, and mine were entirely mine. That evening, I wrote in my notebook once more, summarizing the past week's achievements. Apartment secured, townhouse listed, lawyer consulted, belongings organized, independence achieved, life reclaimed. The words resonated deeply. It wasn't just a summary, it was a declaration. The Clara Reynolds who had spent years waiting, hoping, and adjusting had ceased to exist. In her place stood a woman who recognized her worth, demanded respect, and refused to live in the shadows of someone else's decisions. That night, I slept soundly, my mind quiet for the first time in years. The world outside could carry on with its judgments and expectations. Inside my new apartment, I had carved a sanctuary of autonomy, dignity, and clarity. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, exploring the community, meeting neighbors, discovering what life truly felt like when it revolved entirely around me. And for the first time, I was eager to greet those adventures without hesitation, without guilt, and without compromise. Sunday morning arrived with an unexpected calm. I woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains of my new apartment. a warm glow that highlighted the clean lines and familiar corners of a space I now fully owned. There was no anxiety pressing on my chest, no hesitation about calls from Emma, no mental calculations about whose schedule I should accommodate. I brewed my coffee stronger than usual, letting the aroma fill the small kitchen. I sipped slowly, savoring the quiet, knowing that every decision that had brought me here had been made for me by me. After breakfast, I walked to the community lounge, where a few neighbors were already gathering. Some were reading, others chatting quietly. I introduced myself and found myself immersed in light conversation about books, local events, and favorite recipes. It was pleasant, but more than that, it felt like being treated as an adult with agency, not as someone's mother or caretaker. Later that morning, I decided to explore the gardens. Rows of flowers bloomed, bushes trimmed neatly, and the scent of freshly mown grass mixed with the perfume of early chrysanthemums. I watched Mrs. Thompson, an elegant 70-year-old, carefully water her small rose patch. "Good morning," I said, and she smiled warmly. "Care to join me?" I accepted, and for the first time, we shared a simple conversation without referencing family obligations or responsibilities. I was simply Clara Reynolds, interested in roses and sunlight, not waiting for approval from anyone. The phone rang mid-morning. I glanced at the caller ID and froze briefly. It was Emma. My first instinct was to panic, to prepare for explanations, apologies, or emotional manipulation. But then I reminded myself I was not obligated to rearrange my life for her, and I picked up with calm certainty. "Hello, Emma," I said, my voice steady. "Hi, Mom," she replied, hesitant, uncertain. There was a pause. I saw the townhouse online. Is that true?" she asked finally. "Yes," I said simply. "It's listed. The sale process has begun." Another pause. I didn't realize you were serious," she admitted, her voice tinged with surprise. I stayed silent for a moment, letting the words settle. "I am," I said. "It's time for me to have a life that doesn't revolve around waiting for approval or inclusion in decisions I cannot control." "Mom, I thought you'd be upset about my wedding," she said, almost whispering. I took a deep breath. I was hurt, Emma, but what I realized is that my life cannot be paused for someone else's decisions. The wedding happened, and it's over. I was excluded, yes, but that doesn't define the next chapter of my life. I do. I could hear her exhale, uncertain, trying to process what I had just said. "Are you angry?" she asked. "I'm disappointed," I admitted. Disappointed that I was not included, but not bitter. Disappointed that I was still adjusting to your choices, but not resentful. Most importantly, I am at peace with the life I am choosing for myself. The line went quiet. I knew she was struggling to grasp that I had shifted the dynamic entirely. "Mom, I don't know what to say," she murmured. "You don't have to say anything," I replied. "You need to understand that decisions have consequences. I can no longer allow myself to wait for inclusion or recognition in your life without it being mutual and respectful. That's all." Another long pause, this one heavier, filled with emotion she couldn't yet articulate. Finally, she asked, "So, what does this mean? For us?" I smiled, though she couldn't see me. "It means that I am your mother, Emma. I always will be. But it also means I am not the mother who waits for crumbs of attention. We can rebuild a relationship, but it will have to be based on respect, consideration, and honesty. Nothing less." "Mom, I understand," she said quietly. The conversation ended shortly after that, leaving me with a calm that I had not felt for years. For the first time, I had established boundaries without guilt. That afternoon, I took a long walk through the neighborhood surrounding the apartment complex. I discovered a small coffee shop tucked into a corner with a sign advertising freshly baked scones and espresso drinks. I made a note to return, imagining myself sitting there on crisp mornings, enjoying solitude and the occasional conversation with a friendly barista. Returning home, I unpacked a few more boxes, placing books on shelves and hanging a few pictures that reminded me of moments when I had been truly happy, independent of anyone else. Each object placed was a subtle affirmation. This is my life now. Later, I joined a small knitting circle that met in the community lounge. Mrs. Rodriguez, an elegant 74-year-old former dressmaker, led the group. I watched her hands move expertly through the yarn, creating intricate patterns that seemed almost magical in their precision. "You'll find your rhythm quickly, Clara," she said when she noticed me hesitating. And she was right. By the end of the hour, I had completed a small square of a patterned scarf. Mrs. Rodriguez examined my work and smiled. "Beautiful," she said, touching the fabric lightly. It was a simple compliment, but it carried weight I had never experienced. Recognition for something I had done well, simply because it was good. No obligations, no expectations, no comparisons. That evening, as I returned to my apartment, I realized that I hadn't thought about Emma or the wedding even once. Instead, I had thought about how sunlight fell on the balcony, how to arrange my furniture, and how to manage my small but complete domain. I had not only found a new home, I had begun to find myself. Over the next few days, life continued to settle into a comforting rhythm. I met neighbors during morning walks, shared lunches in the community lounge, and even signed up for a yoga class on Thursdays. Each activity, each interaction reinforced the reality that my life now belonged to me. Emma called once more that week, hesitant again, inquiring about the sale of the townhouse and my move. I answered honestly but without urgency, without rearranging my schedule, without apologizing for living my life. Her pauses were long, filled with emotion she could not yet express. And I realized with quiet satisfaction that she was beginning to understand the new dynamics. The townhouse had been sold within a week of listing. Mr. Collins delivered the news by phone, noting that the new owners were delighted with the property. I smiled to myself. The sale was not just a financial transaction, it was a symbolic closing of one chapter and the opening of another. With that responsibility no longer looming over me, I could focus entirely on the life I was creating. By the following Saturday, the bulk of my belongings had been moved into my new apartment. I placed a small vase of chrysanthemums on the kitchen counter, a subtle nod to autumn, and arranged a few photographs of old friends and places I had loved. The space was functional, cozy, and entirely mine. That evening, I stood on the balcony, coffee in hand, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. For the first time in decades, I did not feel the familiar tug of disappointment or longing for approval. Instead, I felt autonomy, dignity, and the strange, exhilarating freedom of knowing that every choice, every action, every plan was mine alone. I realized then that life did not have to be defined by what others expected or allowed me to do. It could be defined entirely by my own desires, my own rhythm, and my own standards. And in that moment, watching the city lights emerge as darkness fell, I felt a profound peace settle over me, a peace I had not known since long before Emma's wedding. It was not a temporary relief or a fleeting satisfaction. It was the steady, grounding certainty that I had finally reclaimed my life, and that no one, not even my daughter, could take it from me. Monday morning began with a quiet sense of purpose. I woke early, earlier than I had in years, and made my coffee, letting the bitter warmth fill the kitchen of my new apartment. The small space was beginning to feel truly mine. Each object placed, each photo hung, each plant carefully positioned on the balcony reflected a life built for me and no one else. After breakfast, I decided to explore the community further. The legacy at Peachtree had more to offer than I had realized, and I wanted to understand the full spectrum of life here. I walked down the central pathway, lined with meticulously trimmed hedges and cheerful flower beds. A few residents waved, and I waved back, feeling a warm sense of inclusion I had not experienced in years. I met Mr. Harrison, a widower in his late 70s, who had a gentle smile and a quiet dignity. We exchanged pleasantries about the gardens and the weather, and he invited me to join a small walking group that met every morning. I agreed, realizing that these simple routines could form the backbone of a fulfilling day. By mid-morning, I returned to my apartment to review the documents related to the townhouse sale. The transaction had completed smoothly and the funds were now secure in my accounts. I allowed myself a small smile. This money, once set aside for emergencies and for Emma's future, would now serve me, my comfort and my independence. I no longer had to calculate every dollar spent or live with the constant worry of whether Emma might need something from me. The freedom was intoxicating. As I sat down at the small kitchen table, I reflected on the past weeks. The shift from a life centered entirely around Emma to one where I was the protagonist had not been easy. The first phone call after the move had been tense, a mixture of curiosity, guilt, and confusion from Emma, and a demonstration of my newfound clarity and boundaries from me. It was clear that she was still processing the reality that I no longer waited for her approval or inclusion, but I felt no fear, only confidence. Later that day, I attended my first yoga class. The instructor, a cheerful woman named Linda, welcomed me warmly and guided the group through a series of stretches and breathing exercises. I struggled initially, my body stiff from decades of sedentary routines, but I persisted. By the end of the hour, I was sweating, slightly aching but exhilarated. The sense of accomplishment was tangible, and I realized that this was not merely exercise. It was reclaiming my body, my strength, and my agency. Returning to the apartment, I prepared a light lunch and then settled on the balcony with a book I had been meaning to read for years. The sun cast a warm glow over the gardens, and the occasional laughter of residents drifted up from below. For the first time, I could fully immerse myself in a book without checking my phone for messages, without worrying about whether Emma or Devin would call, without planning my day around someone else's schedule. That evening, I joined a small group dinner in the community dining hall. The atmosphere was relaxed, with the faint clatter of silverware and the soft hum of conversation. I sat between Mrs. Rodriguez and another resident, Mrs. Keller, a lively woman with a quick wit and a sharp sense of humor. Our conversation meandered through topics of gardening, old recipes, and favorite television shows. No one spoke of family obligations or responsibilities, only of life lived for the present. It was liberating. During the meal, I noticed a young couple visiting the community. They were there to see a resident's apartment, and I realized how naturally I could imagine someone coming to visit me in this space, not as a dependency, not as a familial duty, but as a guest in a home that was mine. After dinner, I returned to my apartment and decided to organize a few remaining items in storage. Among them were boxes containing Emma's childhood belongings, old drawings, school projects, clothes she had outgrown. I handled each item carefully, remembering the years they represented, the care I had invested in her life. But I did not linger. I made the decision to place these boxes in a storage unit nearby, clearly labeled, for her to retrieve if she wished. I would not carry the weight of her past or her choices anymore. The choice to access these memories was hers alone. Later that night, as I prepared for bed, I received another call from Emma. I felt a twinge of anticipation, but reminded myself that I controlled the terms of this interaction. "Mom," she began, her voice hesitant, "I just wanted to know, how are you really?" I paused, then replied calmly, "I am well, Emma. Adjusting to life here, discovering new routines, and enjoying the freedom to make decisions for myself." There was a long silence, broken only by her quiet acknowledgement. I'm glad you're okay," she said softly. "I suppose it's strange not to be part of your plans anymore." I felt a surge of clarity. It is strange, yes, but it is also necessary. My life is mine now, and while I will always love you, I will no longer structure my existence around your choices. If you wish to be part of it, it will require mutual respect and honesty, nothing less. There was another pause, this one heavier with contemplation. Finally, she said, "I understand, Mom. I think I do." I smiled, sensing that while she was processing, the message had begun to land. "Good. That is all I ask, Emma. You don't need to act immediately. Just understand that this is the foundation on which we can rebuild a relationship, if that is what we both want." After the call, I sat on the balcony with a cup of tea, the night air cool against my skin. The city lights twinkled below, a reminder that life continued beyond this small apartment, yet here I was, fully present, fully capable, fully independent. That same week, I attended my first knitting circle, and Mrs. Rodriguez guided me through a small, intricate pattern. I marveled at my progress, delighted by the fact that I could focus on something purely for enjoyment without thinking about its utility for anyone else. Each stitch was a quiet affirmation of my autonomy, a tangible reminder that I could create, nurture, and cultivate for myself. On Friday, I participated in an afternoon painting workshop. The instructor, a patient artist named Karen, encouraged us to paint landscapes or abstract designs as we felt inspired. I chose a simple scene, the view from my balcony with the garden and the soft autumn light. As my brush moved across the canvas, I felt an unfamiliar sense of ownership, not just of the painting, but of the act of creation itself. When I stepped back to observe my work, I realized it was the first time in decades that I had done something solely for myself, without external validation or expectation. The weekend brought a community outing to a nearby botanical garden. I joined Mrs. Rodriguez, Mrs. Keller, and Mr. Harrison, walking along paths lined with vibrant flowers and trees shedding golden leaves. We laughed, shared stories, and marveled at the beauty surrounding us. At that moment, I felt a fullness I had not known in years. It was not a replacement for family or daughterly love, but it was a proof that life could be rich, meaningful, and joyful when built intentionally for oneself. When I returned home that evening, I received a brief text from Emma. "I hope you're doing well. Thinking of you." I smiled and did not respond immediately. I allowed myself a pause, a moment of reflection. She had reached out, but the balance of power had shifted. I could choose how, when, or even if I would respond. That was a freedom I had not experienced in decades. As I settled into bed, I thought about the past months, the wedding, the exclusion, the sale of the townhouse, and this apartment that now represented my life reclaimed. The initial pain had not disappeared, but it had transformed. It had become clarity, motivation, and a steadfast resolve to never again allow my life to be dictated by the approval of others. For the first time in years, sleep came easily, untroubled by anxiety or anticipation. It was a sleep rooted in the certainty of self-respect and the knowledge that every tomorrow would belong to me. The following weeks at my new apartment were unlike anything I had imagined. Every morning, I woke up and poured myself a cup of coffee, standing by the window as the sunlight hit the small balcony I now called mine. I could see the street below bustling with life, hear the distant chatter of neighbors, and smell the faint aroma of freshly baked bread from the bakery 2 blocks away. It was ordinary in the way a life finally lived for oneself should be, quiet, comforting, predictable in a way that was freeing. I started to notice things I had ignored for years. The sound of the wind rustling through the trees, the way my cat, Jasper, would curl at the foot of my chair during knitting sessions. The simple satisfaction of arranging my own furniture exactly how I wanted it. For the first time in decades, my days were not dictated by someone else's schedule or expectations. The emails from Hope became sporadic, cautious, polite. She asked about small things, how the apartment was, if I needed help with anything, but never again with the entitled urgency that had marked her calls before. And I, for the first time, realized how it felt not to be tethered to someone else's timeline. I responded when I wanted, not because I had to, and the sense of autonomy was intoxicating. Sometimes I wondered if she would ever understand the depth of my disappointment, but then I realized that it no longer mattered. My life was no longer about her recognition or approval. It was about me. One afternoon, as I sat knitting a scarf in the sunroom, Patricia, the receptionist, stopped by with a small envelope. "It came for you today, Mrs. Harrison," she said, smiling. I took it and noticed the familiar handwriting of Hope. My heart tightened, but only for a brief moment. I opened the letter carefully, reading each word. She explained her apologies again, her regrets, her assurances that she would do better. But this time, I read it without the old twinge of desperation. I had grown. I had finally built a life that was mine, and no letter, no matter how heartfelt, could change that foundation. I folded the letter neatly, put it in a drawer, and continued knitting. My mind wandered to all the things I wanted to do, the small joys I had postponed for decades, a trip to Charleston in the spring, a painting class that had always intrigued me, late-night walks with Jasper when the city was quiet and still. Every plan was a reminder that my life had finally become mine, unbound by obligation or guilt. On Sundays, I went to Mass in the small chapel here at the Legacy, but I no longer prayed for Hope to notice me or for the family dynamics to align with my desires. I prayed quietly for strength, for patience, and for the continued courage to live fully in my own space. One evening, as I watered the plants on my balcony and watched the sunset, I thought about all the mothers who, like me, had spent years bending and shaping themselves for others. The women who had given every ounce of love, every sleepless night, every sacrifice, only to find themselves invisible at the moments that mattered most. I thought of them and wanted to whisper something across the invisible line that connected us. It's never too late. It is never too late to choose yourself, to honor your dignity, to live in a way that reflects your worth. And in that quiet reflection, I felt a profound gratitude, not for the life I had lost, but for the life I had courageously created. Sometimes I wondered if Hope would ever truly grasp the consequences of excluding me, if she would understand that love includes respect, boundaries, and the recognition of another person's individuality. Perhaps she would, perhaps she wouldn't. That uncertainty no longer frightened me. I had discovered a joy, a peace, a freedom that no apology or recognition could grant me, and in that freedom I was whole. I spent the evening in the communal dining hall with my new friends, laughing over stories of past adventures, sharing dreams of future ones. Mrs. Mercedes complimented me on my knitting, Mr. Davis encouraged me to try the tango at the next dance class, and Jasper, curled under the table, purred contentedly. I realized then that the life I had built was not just comfortable, it was vibrant, alive, and completely mine. Some nights, I think back to that moment when I saw the photos of her wedding online and felt the world shift beneath my feet. I remember the initial heartbreak, the quiet rage, the long nights of reflection. And yet every painful step led me here, to a life filled with choice, companionship, and self-respect. For anyone reading this who has ever felt invisible, undervalued, or sidelined by those they loved most, I want to tell you what I have learned. Your worth is not measured by the attention or recognition you receive from others. It is measured by the courage you have to honor yourself, the clarity you have to make decisions that protect your dignity, and the love you are willing to give yourself after years of giving to everyone else. Today, 6 months later, I wake up in my cozy apartment every morning, take my coffee to the balcony, breathe deeply, and feel that the world is full of possibilities. I water my plants, watch the sunrise, smile at neighbors, and laugh genuinely, often without reason. I read books that challenge me, write letters that I may never send, and dream dreams that are entirely my own. Sometimes, when my phone rings with an unknown number, I know it is Hope, trying to reconnect through other channels. And I let the calls go to voicemail, because for the first time in my life is mine to prioritize. Some doors, once closed, remain closed. Some moments, once lost, cannot be relived, and that is the profound gift of choosing yourself. You finally understand that love, even the deepest love, sometimes transforms into respect, patience, and self-preservation. It is not born of hatred or vengeance, but of the quiet, unshakable commitment to live authentically, fully, and joyfully. And in that quiet, I found not just my voice, but my freedom, my peace, and my life. Did you like the story, and which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.